What's the creepiest real-life encounter you've had with a disturbing person? Story 1. This is a real story that has deeply traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the United Kingdom for university, as I had always wanted to study there and get away from my parents, since the situation at home was becoming too toxic for me. In my first year at university, I lived in student accommodation and met some really great people. It was a good year, even without meeting my boyfriend, just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. As second year came, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented through student accommodation services, but at least we had our own house and weren't restricted as much with noise and gatherings as we were living in a small shared flat during the first year. I had a ground floor room, and my window opened into a very small backyard where I would go smoke every day. In that backyard, there was a thin wooden door leading to the other side of the street, where we kept bins and broken furniture. The door could only be locked from inside the backyard, but since it was an old door, we had to attach strings to keep it shut properly. On each side of the house, we had neighbors, families, and some other students. To the right of us were five men who looked much older than typical university students. They were unusual, to say the least. I first met one of them outside after a police intervention, when one of his flatmates attacked him and the others with a kitchen knife and set fire to their kitchen. I heard screams, so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them covered in blood and cuts on his arms, with a wound on his head from the knife. We didn't know what to do, so we helped clean him up and gave him an old shirt to replace his bloody clothes. Then we saw the man who had attacked them being taken away by police and driven off to be arrested. We weren't told anything more about it. The guy we helped seemed strange. He spoke nonsense, kept trying to grab me, flirted inappropriately, and smoked a lot of cannabis. We ignored his behavior at the time, just wanting to make sure he was safe. After that, I would sometimes see him in the street but avoided him. One day, as I was heading to the corner shop, he came up to me, spoke to me in a strange way, and made me uncomfortable. When I didn't respond, he said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll just wait in front of your house and we can talk further." This creeped me out. I thought he was joking, but when I returned to my street, I saw him and his flatmate sitting on my doorstep. Panicking, I went back to the shop and called my only male flatmate to ask him to open the door and send them away, but he wasn't home, and neither were the others. I waited outside for an hour until they finally left, then sprinted back home and locked the front door. Our front door had a glass panel where you could make out figures standing outside, so I felt uneasy every time. Later, while smoking in the backyard, I noticed the wooden door open and the strings we had tied were cut. I thought one of my flatmates had taken the bins out and forgotten to tie it back, so I closed it and replaced the string. Our neighbors often shouted and fought in their house, waking us in the night, but we grew used to it. One evening, my boyfriend was staying over. He usually never woke from noises, but he woke me in the middle of the night after hearing a bang and whispering. We both froze and listened. Suddenly, the wooden door banged open, and we heard footsteps near my window, which I kept open because of the heat. Then we heard the backyard door rattling softly, as if someone was trying to open it, then stopping. We stayed completely still, thankful the curtains were closed. Then my window moved, pushed further open, and we heard one of them speak in a language we didn't understand before they tried to climb in. My boyfriend and I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, put on clothes, and ran out of the room and out of the house. I called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in, then called the police, who luckily arrived in less than 5 minutes as the station was close by. I don't remember much after that as we were both in shock. The police caught one man while another fled and was later found a few streets away. They told us they had searched their house and found a large amount of narcotics and that the men had been carrying a massive kitchen knife. I was horrified, as I had never done anything to them, and the thought of them breaking in with such intentions terrified me and my boyfriend. The two men were arrested, and one of them was sentenced to 2 years in prison for carrying a weapon with intent to harm. I never heard more from the police, and a few months later I moved back home, still frightened and haunted by the thought of what might have happened if my boyfriend hadn't woken up. I am still coping with it and find it difficult to move past, constantly asking myself, what if, and waking at the slightest noise. I often have nightmares, but at least I am still with my boyfriend, and we talk about it often, which helps. Story 2. I am 21 years old and live in a relatively small apartment complex with 6 floors and about 4 apartments per floor. There is no doorman. About a month ago, I saw this very tall man when I was coming back to the apartment. My key fob didn't work at the front entrance, so I went around the back and he followed me. I tried to close the door behind me, but I think he had his own fob because he came in as well. He waited in the elevator while I stalled by checking my mail and picking up a package. Thankfully, he eventually went up without me. This morning, I was taking out the trash and went down the elevator to the lobby. The same man was there, and he looked at me and said, "You're nice," in a very unsettling way. I walked down the hallway to the back door, and he followed me. I took out the trash, and he just stood on the back porch by the back door watching me. At that point, I was really frightened, but I needed to get back inside. I decided to go around to the front entrance to see if he would leave, but instead he opened the front door for me. I tried to stall again by checking my mail, but I had none, and he kept lingering in the lobby, seemingly waiting for me to get into the elevator and reveal my floor. Not wanting to risk it, I quickly slipped into the stairwell and sprinted up to my apartment. I noticed him starting to follow me into the stairwell, but luckily I managed to lose him. Now I feel extremely shaken. I called my property manager and they said they would notify the other managers and let me know if they decide to take any action. He seems to live in the complex, so I am unsure what can really be done. I am very unsettled and wondering if anyone has safety tips or advice on what I should do. Story 3. This happened in 1996 in my hometown of about 100,000 people. I was 15 years old, living in the suburbs and attending high school in the city. English is not my first language, so I apologize if anything sounds unusual. After finishing classes one day, I decided to walk to the main bus station instead of waiting at the closest stop. I stood at the gate where my bus line, number 15, started. Another line, number 17, also departed from the same place. After about 10 minutes, a man asked me if bus number 17 had already left. I told him yes, that he had just missed it. The man, who looked to be around 30 or 40, then introduced himself as Mark and reached out his hand. Not wanting to be impolite, I shook it and introduced myself as Maya, though that was not my real name. It already felt strange to me that a grown man would approach me at a bus station like that. He asked if I had just finished school. I said yes. He asked which school I went to, and I lied. He asked if I was going home, and I lied again, saying I was going to a friend's house. Then my bus pulled up, and I got on. To my surprise, the man who had asked about number 17 got on as well, even though I knew the two routes had no stops in common. I sat down, and he sat right next to me. He asked which year of high school I was in. I lied and said I was a junior, even though I was really a freshman. He said I looked too young to be a junior. I brushed it off. He then asked if I had a boyfriend. When I said no, he told me that I should. I asked him where he was going. He said home. When I reminded him about number 17, he claimed he lived at the very end of line 15. That was strange, because I had never seen him on that bus before. He asked if I was going home too. I repeated my lie about visiting a friend. At the time, I thought I had the situation under control. Looking back, I should have spoken to the bus driver or someone nearby, but I didn't want to cause a scene. He seemed more like a lonely, odd man than a real danger. When we reached my stop, I deliberately stayed on the bus and got off at the next one, thinking I could lose him, but he got off too. I asked where he was going, and he said he wanted to walk me home. I insisted that I wasn't going home, but he didn't care. In a stern voice, he told me to shut up and walk. The street was empty. My heart sank. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me that he didn't have much time, so we should get going. He added that if I behaved, I didn't need to be scared of him. He forced me to repeat, "Yes, I will be good." I began walking, not knowing where to go, terrified. I remember praying not to faint from panic. Then I saw an older man tending his garden nearby. That's the last clear memory I have of that moment. I later learned I had started screaming for help and running toward the man. Mark ran off. The older man called the police and my parents. The police only took my statement, saying there was little else they could do. That very day, my parents bought me a phone, which was rare and expensive at the time. Unfortunately, the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I boarded the bus at the stop right in front of my school. As soon as I stepped on, I saw him. He grinned at me with a disturbing excitement. I immediately got off and ran into the school, crying. I called my mother, who told me to find a teacher until she arrived. The school was notified, and after that, he was seen several times walking around the area, though not consistently. The police could do nothing unless he actually harmed me or entered school or home property. For the rest of the year, I waited at school until late so my mom could pick me up, and she always took long detours home to make sure we weren't being followed. Eventually, my parents transferred me to a different school. Thankfully, he never showed up in my neighborhood, and I don't believe he ever knew my real name or address. I only saw him once more, years later when I was 21 and home from university for the summer. I spotted him in a grocery store across town. He didn't recognize me, but I recognized him immediately. Where I live, there is no public record of such people, so I never learned his full name or what became of him. I don't know what he would have done if he had succeeded in walking me away that day. My belief is that he was unstable and fixated on me. My mother believes it was far more deliberate, that he had a plan. My father still refuses to talk about it. Story 4. First of all, I'm a young woman, barely strong enough to handle my giant dog. If things had escalated, I honestly don't know what would have happened. I'm not someone who scares easily, but this rattled me badly. It actually happened just last night, and I have no idea if it will happen again, but it was bizarre enough to share. It's just me and my large dog living in a small, private apartment that's attached to some townhouses, separated from the rest of the buildings by a strip of woods. It feels like a tiny house that just happens to share one wall with the larger building. As nice as it is, it's located in a less than great part of town. Still, it's affordable. I have a backyard, my own space, and working electricity, so I love the place. It's my first time living on my own, and even with a big dog for security, I'll admit I've been a little uneasy. After last night, I'm even more so. I was lying in bed around midnight, scrolling on my phone and trying to fall asleep, when I heard tapping on my bedroom window. The two windows in my room face the backyard, ground level, with about 3 meters of open grass before the tree line. At first, I thought it was branches hitting the glass, but then I remembered there are no trees anywhere near close enough to reach. My stomach sank. I was caught between feeling nervous and just plain irritated that someone or something was keeping me awake. My dog was alert but not barking, which made me think it probably wasn't a person, so I wasn't as panicked as I could have been. The tapping went on for nearly 30 minutes, uneven and random. Finally, my annoyance took over. I figured if it wasn't a person, I was talking to nothing, and if it was a person, acting unfazed might spook them enough to leave. So I called out, "Knock it off!" Nothing changed. A couple of seconds later, I raised my voice. "I'm trying to sleep, stop it." That's when the tapping stopped. And then a male voice answered, "Sorry." My blood ran cold. Someone had been out there the whole time. I grabbed my phone and rushed to the window, ready to call the police. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw a man standing there, with his hands raised and the strangest smile frozen on his face. I turned my phone flashlight on and held it up to my own face so he couldn't see what I looked like. A few seconds later, I switched it off. He hadn't moved an inch. His arms were still up, his face still fixed in that unsettling smile, staring directly at the window like he was posing for a picture. Finally, he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing toward what I assume was his own apartment across from mine. I stood there shaking, trying to process what just happened. What kind of person taps on a stranger's window for half an hour at midnight? This morning, when I looked at the outside of the window, I noticed deep scratches on the glass pane. I can't say for certain he made them, but I'm reporting it to management, and maybe the police, tomorrow. I don't know what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to. I hope he just wanted to mess with me, or try to steal something. But the idea of him wanting into my bedroom is terrifying. So to the weird neighbor across the woods, let's never meet again. Please. Especially not through my bedroom window in the middle of the night. Story 5. This happened in 2008 when I was 9 years old. I lived in a townhome community where each road had homes on both sides, and behind them there was a back road with alleyways in between each building section. My townhome was on one of these alleyways, near the edge of the street. Across the back road, directly opposite my home, lived an elderly woman whose name I never knew. For reasons I still don't understand, she seemed to dislike me specifically. She was unsettling. Her windows were spray painted so no one could see inside her house, yet she would sometimes stare out her bedroom window straight into mine. At night, she kept her window open and shined a red strobe light into my room. She also yelled that she hated us. One January morning, when I was in fourth grade, I missed the school bus. My dad told me to go outside and wait in the car so he could drive me, saying he'd be right out. As I walked toward his car, the woman suddenly appeared from the alleyway beside my house. She moved slowly at first, holding a huge kitchen knife behind her back. Then she raised it and started running after me. Luckily, I was faster. I sprinted back inside and locked the door. From the window, I saw her walk over to the neighbor's porch and just stand there staring at our house. I was shaking with fear. My dad rushed out, yelling at her, and she shouted back that she wanted to get rid of stupid kids. My parents called the police. The officers didn't arrest her. They sent her back home, and later an ambulance came to take her away. My parents attended some kind of court meeting about it, though I never learned the details. I didn't see her again until about a year later. It had snowed that morning, and I excitedly opened the front door to play outside. Standing on our porch was the same woman, this time looking toward the road. I panicked, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I ran to my parents' room and told them what happened. Together, we watched from the window as she walked away up the street. That was the last time I ever saw her. My family has since moved far away, but people I know who still live in the area say she's still there, and her windows are still spray painted the same way. Though it doesn't affect me as much now, I've never felt comfortable around knives since that day. Story 6. I am a 19-year-old woman and moved back into my mother's house late last year. Since around January or February, I've noticed that my neighbor, a man in his 50s or 60s, has been watching me almost every day. The way our houses are laid out is a bit confusing. My backyard ends at the side of his house, so my bedroom window, which is on ground level, directly faces the side of his property. Whenever he goes outside to smoke, he positions himself facing directly toward my room. At first, I convinced myself he was looking at the sky or the scenery behind my house, but over time I realized he never looked anywhere else when I was in my room. It became an almost daily occurrence. At first, I tried hiding, then closing the blinds until he left, then even staring back or flipping him off. He knew I was aware and uncomfortable. He would scurry away when I reacted, but he always came back. Yesterday, things escalated. I had taken the screen off my window so my cats could come in and out, which made it even easier for him to see inside. My younger brother was in the backyard working on our garden, and I was leaning out the window chatting with him. That's when I saw my neighbor again, half hidden behind his house facing me. I had had enough. I yelled across the property for him to stop staring. He ducked back behind the corner, but minutes later I saw him again, peeking his head and eyes around the wall, clearly straining to see me. My blood ran cold. I yelled again. He hid, but came back yet another time. This time I screamed and slammed my window shut. I thought that would be the end of it, but today he was at it again. My window was closed, but he stood watching until I noticed, then ran off. It's making me feel sick. I like keeping my blinds open because I have cacti that need sunlight, and my overhead lights don't work, so I rely on natural light. I don't think I should have to change my entire routine because of a man who won't stop staring. But I also don't know what I can do legally. He's always on his own property. Later it escalated again. He was outside shirtless smoking, and when he noticed me watching, he scurried away and came back again. I grabbed my phone and screamed at him, threatening to call the police. He actually argued back. I tried recording it, but my phone is so old that I don't know if it's saved. I called my mom, who told me to head to a friend's house until she got home. Then she called again, told me to stay put, and said I could go ahead and call the police. So I did. An officer came over, and I showed him exactly where my neighbor stands. Unfortunately, he told me that because the man is on his property, he is technically allowed to face any direction he wants. He said the best thing I could do was get a curtain. I asked if he could at least suggest that the neighbor smoke on the other side of his house, and he agreed to talk to him, but warned me not to expect much change. I explained that this has been going on for months, that I felt violated in my own room. But the officer said without clear evidence of intent, there's nothing they can do legally. To make matters worse, my mom had shut off the outdoor cameras because the alerts were bothering her. If I had footage of him peeking around the corner, I could have proved his intent. Instead, I'm left feeling powerless, living in constant discomfort and unable to relax in my own room. This whole situation has already affected my mental health, and now I wake up at night convinced someone is outside looking in. Story 7. Yesterday, I went to an outlet mall on my own because I needed some new workout clothes. It was rainy but still somewhat busy, so I didn't think much of it. I went into the last store of the day and noticed a man staring me up and down. For context, I'm a woman in my mid-20s. His stare put me on edge, but I ignored it, finished up, and left the store with my hood up to avoid the rain. When I got outside, I loaded my bags into the back seat and hopped into the driver's seat. That's when I realized the same man from the store was now standing right in front of my car. He had his keys in the air, pretending to look for his car, but he lingered around me for a full minute. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence that he parked nearby, but my instincts told me otherwise. Feeling uneasy, I started the car and began reversing out of the spot. As I did, he locked eyes with me through the windshield, smiled in a way that made my blood run cold, and waved. In that instant, I knew he had followed me out of the store to my car. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm grateful I didn't stay to find out. Ladies, please always be aware of your surroundings. Try to avoid going places completely alone when possible. And if it's legal where you live, carry some form of protection like pepper spray. Story 8. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago when I was working as a supervisor at an off-license in a small farming village in the middle of nowhere. It was a little past 10 o'clock at night, closing time. My coworker B, not her real name, and I had finished all our jobs, packed everything away, set the alarm, and stepped outside. I had my key in the motor to bring the shutter down when, out of nowhere, a car engine roared to life. The sound made us both jump. Not a second later, as the shutter hit the pavement, a car came speeding around the corner and stopped abruptly about 15 feet away, conveniently right in the blind spot of the shop's ancient CCTV cameras. I don't know much about cars, but I could tell this one was expensive. Maybe a Jeep or a Land Rover, shiny and pitch black with matching tinted windows. The tint looked darker than what's legally allowed, and we couldn't see inside at all. The engine stayed on, and the driver just sat there. B and I tried to look calm, chatting to each other as we waited, hoping whoever it was would move along. But no one moved, for at least 5 minutes. B, who's older than me and very protective, offered to drive me home. Her car was parked further up the road, so we wouldn't have to walk past the stranger's vehicle. I lived only a 2 or 3 minute walk away, but that route would have taken me directly past the car. At first, I tried to downplay it, saying I'd just crossed to the opposite pavement to give myself some distance. But just as I approached the edge of the street, a man suddenly jumped out of the back seat on the side where I would have been walking. He left the door open. He wasn't masked or dressed in black, but he wore a cap pulled low over his face. He was white, easily 6 feet tall, not bulky but clearly fit, strong enough to overpower B or me, both of us closer to 5 feet and not in great shape. I immediately backed away. As if to appear casual, he lit a cigarette, but at the same time he started circling the back of the car and moved on to our side of the road, keeping maybe 10 feet of distance. Actually, if that offer still stands, I'd love a lift home, I told B, and I could see the relief on her face. We speed walked to her small 2-door car, neither of us taking our eyes off the stranger. Once inside, I reached for my phone to snap a picture of the license plate, while B rummaged for a notepad to write it down. But before we could do either, the man got back into the car and it sped off into the night, leaving behind a half-smoked cigarette. At the time, we theorized they were planning to rob the shop. We would have been easy to overpower, and with at least one more person inside the vehicle, they could have forced me to disarm the alarm and open the safes. A few months later, after I had moved to another job in the city, I heard the shop had actually been robbed at knife point. I don't know if it was the same people, but the timing fit. My mother, who loves true crime, had a darker theory. She believed it was an attempted kidnapping specifically aimed at me. Her reasoning was unsettling. The car parked deliberately in the blind spot of the cameras, no mask or real attempt to conceal identity. The timing, waiting until we were fully outside instead of ambushing us at the door. And the back door left open, as if ready to shove me inside. She pointed out that I always took the same short route home, which they could have easily predicted. Why anyone would have targeted me is still a mystery, but her arguments made sense. Because of that, my stepdad drove me to and from work for the rest of my shifts. Still, the only way I've been able to sleep at night is by telling myself it was all a coincidence. Maybe the man really was just told not to smoke in the car, got out to finish half a cigarette, and they left when they realized the shop was closed. Whatever the case, B and I were shaken, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had ignored her offer and walked home alone that night. Story 9. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 20. For context, I'm a small woman, and that day I was shopping alone in town. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. The city center was busy with families, and after finishing my errands, I decided to visit my grandmother. To get there, I needed to take a 20-minute bus ride. While waiting at the bus stop, I noticed a man staring at me. He wasn't much older than me, and I still remember the bright yellow hat he wore. Normally, I don't care if someone glances at me, but this man's stare was different. There was anger in his eyes, as if I had wronged him somehow. Everyone else at the stop was focused on traffic or looking for their buses, but he had his back to the road and was locked on me. The uneasiness in my stomach grew, and I hoped he wouldn't get on my bus. But he did. I quickly sat by a window, and thankfully an older woman sat beside me, which gave me a shield between myself and him. The man stood near our seat for most of the ride, pacing oddly at times. He didn't say anything, but my gut told me something was wrong. I texted my boyfriend nervously throughout the trip. A few stops before mine, the older woman got off. The man immediately sat next to me, and I froze. I avoided even looking at my phone, worried he might try to see something that could help him track me later. Perhaps sensing my tension, he stood up again and resumed pacing, but the fear stayed with me. When my stop finally came, I waited until the very last moment to get off. Unfortunately, he got off too. That was when it became clear he was following me. He ran ahead on the road, glancing back at me repeatedly. Oddly enough, this gave me my chance. If he had stayed behind me, I would have had no choice but to run for my grandmother's apartment door or bolt in another direction and pray to find safety first. But since he went ahead, I was able to turn around and walk in the opposite direction. I immediately called my mom. It sounds dramatic, but in my mind, if something happened, I wanted her to know who was responsible. I told her what was happening, and she urged me to run to a nearby burger place that had a security guard. Heart pounding, I sprinted toward it. When I glanced back, I saw him chasing after me, which nearly brought me to tears. Luckily, I made it inside before he caught up. From the window, I watched him cross the road, but he didn't follow me inside. I don't know why he fixated on me that day, and I don't want to know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. So to the man in the yellow hat, let's never meet again. Story 10. This happened while I was working at a sandwich shop in downtown Denver. I used to take the bus to and from work every day, and although I saw plenty of odd people on public transportation, as anyone familiar with Colfax Avenue would expect, I never really had issues directed at me personally. That changed one afternoon while I was waiting for the bus in my unflattering work uniform. An older man walked up and struck up a conversation. I was raised to be polite, especially to elders, so I engaged, even though it was obvious he kept staring at my chest. As we talked, he mentioned that he lived nearby and invited me over for dinner. I declined, explaining that I needed to get home and that my boyfriend wouldn't like me having dinner with another man. He winked and said, "Your boyfriend doesn't have to know." I gave a nervous laugh, which I think he took the wrong way. He then asked about my tattoos. I have quite a few, including a large owl across my chest, which often draws comments or crude jokes. As expected, he made one of those jokes, and I tried to brush it off. Then he crossed the line. He said he wished he could see the tattoos that others don't, and as he said it, he rubbed my upper thigh. Shocked, I told him my boyfriend wouldn't like him touching me like that. I was nervous and had no idea how to handle the situation. He just laughed and asked for a hug. I refused, but he lunged in anyway, hugging me tightly. He pressed his whole body against mine and even made a disturbing grinding motion. I froze in fear. Thankfully, a man at the bus stop, who I hadn't even realized was there, stepped in and threatened to beat him up if he didn't back off. The creepy old man finally let go and walked away. After that, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, told me I wasn't allowed to ride the bus anymore. Looking back, I'm grateful that stranger intervened because I don't know how far it could have gone if no one had been around. Story 11. This happened only about 3 weeks ago. I was at a lake with my best friend, her boyfriend, and one of his friends. After swimming, we all headed home. Since his friend needed to be home by 10, they left together on their bikes and I went to catch my bus. Usually that's no problem. They rode with me to the bus station, we said our goodbyes, and her boyfriend jokingly wished me a bad way home. We laughed, it was just sarcasm. But looking back, the irony was unsettling. I sat down at the stop, and after only a couple of minutes, a man approached me. I had my AirPods in, so I took them out, assuming he wanted to ask when the next bus was coming. I couldn't have been more wrong. He asked where I was heading, and I said simply, home. Then he pressed further, asking where exactly I lived. I told him no. In fact, I just answered no to everything he asked after that. He asked if he could drive me, told me I was his girlfriend, insisted I had seen him in his car. Every question and statement got the same response from me. No. Finally, I said directly, please leave me alone. I stayed sitting there for about 30 more seconds. Then my instincts told me to get up and walk away. I immediately called my friends. One of my best friends answered, and I told her what had happened. I said I'd just catch the bus at the next stop, but she told me that would be a mistake. I had to take it from where I was, or I'd miss it entirely. She was right, so instead I called my mom and asked her to pick me up. While I waited, I went into my gym, which was conveniently on the same street. You can only get in with a QR code, so at least I knew I was safe until my mom arrived. This all happened near the border of Berlin and Brandenburg. The man looked disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his movements were jerky. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and got myself to a safe place. Story 12. This isn't the scariest story compared to others, but it's one of those chilling situations that really shows how these things can happen to anyone. About 3 years ago, only a couple of months after me and my boyfriend had gotten together, we decided we were ready to move out and live together. We had been viewing one-bedroom flats but didn't have much luck. Finally, we found one that seemed to have potential, though it was in a converted house rather than a block. The upstairs had been turned into a separate flat, with the original hallway turned into a porch with 2 doors, one leading upstairs to our place and the other leading downstairs to where the landlord lived. We accepted the flat before meeting the landlord, which is something I regret to this day. When we eventually met him, as he had been away when we viewed the flat, I immediately knew that first impressions matter a lot. My gut screamed at me that something was off and I should have listened. He spoke in a very common way, with a thick accent and rough manner, and had these horribly intense, piercing blue eyes. I couldn't even look directly at him. Something about him just made me want to look away. Despite that, he seemed polite enough at first, explaining the rules of living in the flat. But now looking back, so many things about it were shady. The electric meter ran on pound coins, and it cost far more than it should have. About 20 pounds a week just for electricity, which was the same my parents paid for their entire house in the same area. He told us he would come by once a month to collect the money. Gas was separate, though I can't even remember how we paid for that. He also told us we couldn't have internet while living there, because it would involve drilling holes in the walls. Council tax was supposedly included in the rent, meaning we gave it directly to him and he would pay it. None of it felt right. The estate agent had also conveniently forgotten to mention that his wife had died, which was why he had converted the upstairs into a flat. He told us this very casually, but I couldn't stop wondering if we were sleeping in the same room she had died in. The first major red flag was when we moved in. He told us he had left a sofa in the living room and we could do whatever we wanted with it, keep it, sell it, or throw it away. Since my parents needed a sofa, they came to pick it up. As my dad and boyfriend carried it out, the landlord suddenly freaked out, yelling that it was an anniversary present. Instead of calmly asking them to leave it in the garden, he demanded they carry it around to his garage. The way he flipped out, after literally telling us hours earlier that we could do what we wanted with it, was unnerving. A couple of weeks later, we realized he smoked pot constantly. The porch always smelled of it, and it often filled our flat. I didn't mind people smoking it in general, but the smell clinging to everything was gross, especially when guests came over. It added to the general discomfort I felt about him. Even creepier, whenever I came home late from my bar job, usually around 3 a.m., I'd see his silhouette standing in his window, watching as I walked up to the door. He never addressed me directly, only my fiancée. Once, when my fiancée had just come home from a night shift, the landlord opened the door and told him that I was too noisy coming home at night, and that he needed to tell me to be quieter. It didn't matter how careful I was, he always seemed to know. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. We were overjoyed and kept it private, not even talking about it where the landlord might overhear. One afternoon, the landlord knocked, saying he needed to empty the electric meter. Odd, since he had just done it a week before. He came in and started making small talk with my fiancée, but instead of checking the meter, he began walking around our flat. He went straight to the bathroom, pointed to cigarette ash on the windowsill, then went into the kitchen and commented on the dirty dishes, saying they'd been there for days. He didn't even hesitate or look around. He knew exactly where to go. I stepped out with our contract in hand, furious, and read out the part that said he couldn't enter without 2 weeks' notice. He just smirked and said that since my fiancée had let him in, it didn't count. Then out of nowhere, he said, "When were you going to tell me you were pregnant?" The silence after that was crushing. I demanded to know how he knew. First, he said he'd overheard us. When I told him that was impossible, he claimed he saw it on Facebook, but our accounts had the highest privacy settings possible. Later, when we searched, we couldn't even find his name on Facebook. When pressed, he changed his story again, saying a friend told him, but he had no friends visiting during the entire 6 months we lived there. We realized then that he must have been coming into the flat when we weren't home, or worse, that he had been recording us. How else would he have known about the cigarette ash or the state of our kitchen? How did he know I was pregnant? I remembered the folder I had been given at my first midwife appointment, full of booklets and papers, which I kept on my desk in the living room. He hadn't even entered the living room during his inspection. Did he go through it while we were away? We searched for hidden cameras, even in the smoke alarm, but he had done the building work himself, so we had no way of knowing if recording devices were hidden inside the walls. For the last month of our tenancy, I lived in fear. I kept a key in the door at night so he couldn't unlock it. We eventually wrote to the estate agent explaining our suspicions and delivered an official letter to the landlord himself. He never confronted us or denied it. He just ignored us whenever we saw him. When our contract ended, we moved to another flat. Later, out of curiosity, we checked the listings and saw the estate agent had put the same flat back on the market. Despite knowing everything we had reported, that the landlord could have been entering without permission or recording tenants, they relisted it. To this day, the most terrifying part is never knowing for sure what was happening. Was he secretly in our flat? Was he filming us? If he hadn't slipped up and revealed he knew about my pregnancy, how long would we have lived there, unaware that our privacy was being violated? So creepy landlord, who I'm still 90% sure was watching us in some way, let's never, ever meet again. Story 13. I had just moved into a new house over the weekend and paid the first month's rent. I signed a year-long lease. The house itself was built in the 1930s, livable but full of quirks, a strange layout, lots of repairs needed, and an unfinished porch. Honestly, it was a bit of a dump, but I had to take what I could get. I had first seen the house on Craigslist. I immediately called the number listed to arrange a viewing. Right away, the landlord gave me bad vibes. Not exactly creepy at first, but definitely unpleasant. We set up a viewing for Saturday, but every day leading up to it, he texted me multiple times saying things like, "Make sure you're absolutely certain you want to view the house because I don't want my time wasted." I reassured him repeatedly that I lived only 5 minutes away and would be there, no question. I should mention that I was renting the house not just for myself, but also for my elderly father, who uses a wheelchair. When we arrived, the landlord was waiting in the yard with a huge smile on his face. I waved and then went to help my dad out of the car. The landlord's expression immediately turned into a scowl. As we approached, my dad extended his hand for a shake, but the landlord ignored him completely and instead looked straight at me and said, "I thought it was just you." I awkwardly explained that I hadn't mentioned my dad since he hadn't asked. He went ahead and showed us the house. It wasn't great, but it was livable, so we gave him the deposit. We moved in that weekend and paid the rent on the 6th. Shortly after, he told me he would need access to the house to do some plumbing work. I told him no problem, but I'd be at work, so I'd leave the key above the door. I usually finish work around 12:30 and told him as much. At around 10 that morning, he texted me again, pressing me to confirm that I would absolutely not be home before 12:30 because of a safety hazard. I told him yes, I would be there after 12:30, but as it happened, I got off early that day. I was heading home around 11 and figured I would just stop in, let him know I was there, and then stay outside while he worked. Now remember, I said the layout was weird? The front door opens directly into a bedroom, my bedroom. Another door to the left leads into the living room, which connects to the kitchen, back room, and bathroom. I turned the knob and noticed it was unlocked. When I walked in, the first thing I saw was my landlord bolting out of my room. He ran through the living room, kitchen, and back room, and then out the back door. Seconds later, I heard his car tearing out of the driveway. Stunned, I walked back into my bedroom. My underwear drawer was open, clothes strewn everywhere. My nightstand drawer was pulled out as well. My stomach dropped. Now I don't know what to do. I feel stuck here. It's nearly impossible to find housing with my credit, and even harder to find a place that's wheelchair accessible for my dad. I wish I could say, let's not meet again, but the reality is that I'm tied to this place for 12 more months. So creepy landlord, please stay out of my room, stay away from my things, and for the love of everything, leave my underwear alone, you absolute creep. Story 14. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this, and I need to get it off my chest. When I was about 16, I lived with my dad and brothers in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental, meaning my brother would do odd jobs for the landlord as payment for our rent. The landlord never struck me as outright creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came by to talk to my dad. He definitely wouldn't dare try anything in front of him. One day I was home alone. My dad and brothers had gone out somewhere, and I don't even remember where. The only company I had was our dog, who was fenced in the yard outside. I was in my bedroom doing my own thing, probably playing The Sims 2. Our house was isolated, with a long driveway that my window faced, so I could see or hear anyone who came up it. Suddenly I saw a car, not my dad's. My stomach dropped immediately. I panicked. I rushed through the house, shutting all the blinds, turning off the lights, and double-checking that the doors were locked. Then I recognized the car. It was our landlord's. He lived next door, which in our case meant about 2 miles away. Yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time he had come unannounced while I was alone. It had happened twice before. On those earlier visits, he stayed only about 10 minutes, wandering around the outside of the house before leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and crawled under the table to hide. I heard him pull up outside and open the front gate. My dog went absolutely wild, barking nonstop. I heard the landlord yell, "Shut up, mutt!" Then his footsteps on the porch. He tried the front door. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I texted my dad in a frenzy. He said he was on his way home, but it would take about an hour. Meanwhile, the landlord circled the house, rattling the handles of all 3 doors and trying to peer into every window. At first, I told myself maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the other times had been coincidences. But then I heard him call out my name. He knew I was there, and he knew I was alone. I crept through the hallway, following the sound of his voice as he moved around the house, trying to catch his words. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn the house down, but I'll let you out first." Even though I didn't believe him, the threat wasn't the point. He wanted me to come outside. He wanted me to take him seriously. And the realization of what could have happened if I had believed him still terrifies me. He stayed outside for at least half an hour, maybe close to an hour, circling and calling out, never letting up. He left only shortly before my dad got back. I told my dad everything. We moved out soon after. To this day, I don't know how he knew I was home alone. My dad never passed him on the road, so how did he time it perfectly? He must have noticed there was no car in the driveway. But how did he know I wasn't out with my dad and brothers? That's the part that unsettles me most. So, to that creep of a landlord, thankfully we never met again. And I never want to know what would have happened if I had stepped outside that day. Story 15. When I was 18, I was desperate to find a place to live for university. There's a massive housing shortage where I live, so I went on Facebook to look for a room. Eventually, a man from Egypt sent me a message saying he had a private room available. He told me he had moved back to Egypt due to illness and was renting out his three-bedroom house. His Facebook profile had no picture and no information beyond his name. He gave me the address and arranged for me to get a tour of the house with the current tenants who were moving out. His son was the one who let me in, gave me the tour, and later mailed me the keys. The house was a shared place with three student tenants, with a communal kitchen and bathroom. Everything seemed normal and fairly clean. I asked the tenants why they were leaving, and they simply said, "The landlord is a weird guy." I brushed it off and signed the contract via email. After that tour, I never saw the sun again. Once I signed, the landlord got my phone number from the contract and began messaging me on WhatsApp. At first, it was just him saying he wanted to build a friendship. I told him I was too busy with school. He started calling me, sometimes 10 times a day, asking why I wasn't picking up. He said he was lonely and needed company. I mostly ignored him and kept paying rent. About a month after I moved in, his messages became unsettling. He wrote things like, "I notice you have a heater and an air fryer on your table. Could you please not use those? Why do you own two laptops? That's kind of strange." This shocked me. If he was supposedly living in Egypt and I had never seen him in person, and my windows and doors were always shut and locked, how did he know what was inside my private room? The messages kept coming, always commenting on the exact items I had in my room or how I arranged them. Worse, he tried to charge me an extra 150 euros on the rent because, according to him, I was using the air fryer too much. But I never took the air fryer out of my private room. How could he know I was using it? I spoke to my roommates, who were all students too, and told them about the messages. They said they had never gotten anything like that, only simple reminders like, "Rent has been paid." I checked their WhatsApp to confirm, and they were telling the truth. I also tested whether their keys could open my room. None of them could, and they were gone most of the day. That's when I decided to test the landlord. I started putting random objects on my desk, things I never normally had out, just to see what he would say. Sure enough, he noticed and sent messages describing them. That's when I completely freaked out, in the middle of one of my lectures. 2 days later, after I ignored his comments, I began receiving multiple calls from unknown numbers. Twice I answered, and the voice sounded vaguely like him, saying, "Come home." When I got back, the trash I had thrown out earlier that day was dumped all over the front door to my room. I dealt with this for nearly a year before finally finding a safer place to live. I filed a restraining order against him, but I still have no idea how he knew what was in my private room, or how that trash ended up at my door. Some friends think there must have been hidden cameras. Others think maybe one of my roommates was spying for him, but I'll never know for sure. Story 16. I've always been interested in crime solving and forensic TV shows, and maybe that's why I tend to notice unsettling details about people. For years, I worked as a night charge nurse in a hospital. There was one housekeeper, let's call him M, who was regularly assigned to my area. From the start, he gave me an odd feeling. He wasn't particularly conscientious or good at his job. He would often wear his work shirt hanging open with a dingy, grayish, white t-shirt underneath, and I always suspected he wore a hairpiece. The strangest part was the way he looked at people. It was like we were insects he was studying under a microscope. I tried to treat him kindly, just as I treated everyone, but M's behavior was unnerving. I'd often catch him lurking, standing half hidden behind doors or corners, listening to conversations between me and other staff members. It wasn't casual overhearing either. He seemed to be deliberately spying. His presence carried a strange intensity, like he was always watching. Once I mentioned to a colleague from the lab down the hall that M gave me serial killer vibes and seemed like he was constantly observing us. My colleague didn't dismiss it. Instead, she said, "Well, first impressions are often correct." That only made the feeling stronger. There was another time when someone nearby was venting about a bad relationship with a girlfriend. M suddenly jumped into the conversation. His face twisted, his demeanor changed completely, and he began talking about how his own girlfriend once made him so angry. The way he described it, loud, menacing, barely holding himself together, made the hair on my neck stand up. It was like a mask slipped for a moment, showing something dark beneath. One day, M approached me directly and asked if I would submit a positive review about his work to his supervisor, saying it could help him get a monetary bonus. I said, sure, no problem. And later I did exactly that. He got the bonus. When my coworker found out, she was incredulous. Why would you do that? He's barely mediocre at his job, she asked. I just shrugged and told her, because I think he's a serial killer that just hasn't been caught yet. And if he picks his next victim, I want to make sure I've given him no reason to kill me. It sounds like a dark joke, but deep down, I wasn't joking at all. Story 17. This is the story of a coworker I had a long time ago. Looking back, I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was incredibly distressing. Every summer, I used to do temp work for the company where my dad worked. It was an education company, and during July and August, they needed lots of temp workers for exam remarking season. The work was mostly data entry, but it suited me fine. I did it every summer from when I was 19 until 23, and after graduating, I even got a semi-permanent job there. Everyone knew me as my dad's daughter, and I was a familiar face. The only downside was that when I finished work at 5, I had to wait for my dad, since he was head of a department and always finished later. I usually sat in a foyer area between our departments, reading on the couches until he was done. I must have been about 22 when this happened. I just cut my hair short and dyed it red for the first time. While I was sitting and reading, this guy approached me. Let's call him Leon. He said he worked in my dad's department and wanted to introduce himself. That wasn't unusual. Lots of people knew who I was. Leon was young and decent looking, and I knew some women in my department had a crush on him. I was dating someone else at the time, but I could see why they liked him. We started chatting, but then things got weird. He cut me off mid-sentence and began describing every hairstyle I'd had for the last 2 years. Brown with no fringe, then curled, then a fringe, then dyed red, then purple, and now short and red again. I had never spoken to him before, but somehow he'd kept track of my appearance over years. That should have been the first red flag. Then he asked if I had Facebook. I said yes, and he sent me a friend request. But instead of leaving it at that, he asked me to take out my phone and show him that I was accepting it right there in front of him. Being British and too polite, I did it, thinking it might calm him down. But it didn't. After that, he kept asking if I had MSN. I told him I didn't. He asked again. And again. I swear he asked 4 times. Then he begged me to get MSN so we can chat after work. It was like he had something urgent to tell me, even though we just met. I laughed it off and said I hadn't used MSN since I was a teenager. Immediately, he asked if I had Skype. I told him I didn't have my own, but that I used my dad's Skype account to talk to my boyfriend, who was abroad at the time. I thought mentioning my boyfriend would make him back off. Instead, he said, "Can you please just get your own Skype so we can video chat after work?" He acted like I was inconveniencing him by not already having it. Before I could respond, someone from his department walked by and said, "Leon, aren't you supposed to be at your desk?" He scurried off, but not before reminding me to get Skype and send him the details. That evening, I was working on my computer when a message popped up on Facebook. It was Leon. The message just said, "We like the same movies." Something about it made me feel sick. I logged off without responding, hoping he wouldn't notice I'd been online. The next day, as I was sitting in my usual spot, he stormed over with a thunderous look on his face. My heart sank as I realized he was walking directly toward me. "Why didn't you respond to my Facebook message?" he demanded. I didn't know what to say, but before I could answer, he launched into a list of every film we had in common on my profile. Batman, The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Fight Club. After reeling them all off, he simply said, "It's okay, I forgive you," and walked away. From then on, he came to find me every single day, talking at me until my dad came to pick me up. It got so stressful that I started hiding in the toilets after work just to avoid him. My coworkers noticed and thought I was acting strange. Eventually, I told my dad, and he gave me his car keys so I could hide out in the car instead. For a while, that worked. One day, though, I saw Leon leave the building and start looking through the car park. He was scrutinizing every vehicle. I ducked down too late. He saw me and came running over. He tapped on the glass until I rolled the window down. I didn't see you in your usual spot, but luckily the doorman told me you came out here. Why are you in your dad's car? He asked. I lied and said I had a headache and wanted to rest. Thankfully, he left after that. I only had a few days left before returning to university, and eventually my dad gave Leon a stern talking to. Leon still sought me out, but only briefly in passing, which was a relief. On my last day, I expected some big scene, but he didn't even approach me. Not long after, I heard he'd been fired for constant lateness and chatting too much at work. Fast forward to 2014. I had graduated and taken a semi-permanent role at the same company while preparing to move to China to teach English. On my last day, who should walk through the door but Leon? He'd been hired again as a temp. As soon as he saw me, recognition lit up his face. He came straight over asking about me. A coworker mentioned I was moving to China, and Leon seized on it, talking about a friend who also wanted to do TEFL. He kept me talking for 20 minutes, asking who I trained with and what company I was joining. At the end of the day, I was saying goodbyes when Leon approached again, all smiles and wished me luck. Then just as I was walking out the door, he called after me, "See you in China." For the first 2 weeks of my training overseas, I was on high alert, watching everywhere I went, half expecting him to show up. Thankfully, he never did, but it remains one of the creepiest experiences of my life. Story 18. This creepy encounter happened on my way home from school. I had finished early that day, I think we had exams, and was waiting at the bus stop at an unfamiliar time. While I was there, an older man started talking to me. Unfortunately, I've always been the kind of person strangers feel comfortable approaching. Small, non-threatening, and at that stage of life, obviously unsure of myself. I assumed he was just a lonely old man, so I was polite, but didn't give much away, all the while silently begging for my bus to arrive. Then he asked if he could hold my hand. I said no, but he kept pressing, asking me why not, and eventually just grabbed it. This was on a crowded street in central London, so I didn't think he would actually try to kidnap me, but it was still frightening and deeply uncomfortable. He started asking more personal questions like whether I had a boyfriend. I lied and said yes. He then asked if my boyfriend was English. When I said yes, he replied, "You should get an Italian boyfriend." More S. I went bright red, horrified and embarrassed. At that age, causing a scene felt worse than anything, so I tried to keep my composure even though I was panicking inside. Finally, a bus came, not mine, but one that stopped within walking distance of my house. I silently thanked my lucky stars that I hadn't told him which bus I was actually waiting for. I quickly said, "Here's my bus," yanked my hand free, and ran onto the bus. It was one of those old red London double-deckers where you climb on at the open back corner. To my dismay, after I sat by the window trying to put the whole thing behind me, the man slowly climbed the stairs and sat down right next to me. The top deck wasn't crowded at all, but the seats were undivided benches. He grabbed my hand again. The memory of his clammy, sweaty grip still makes me feel sick. While holding on to me, he began moving his other hand in his pocket, and I realized what he was doing. He tried to pull my hand toward him as I struggled to wrench it away. After a while, either not noticing or not caring about how horrified I was, he simply announced it was his stop. He got off the bus, leaving me there, shaken and in tears. No one asked if I was okay. When I finally reached my stop, I took the long way home, feeling dirty and sick. It actually took me years to tell this story in full. For a long time, I brushed it off with jokes and left out the disturbing details. Even now, I struggle with the idea of dating anyone much older, and I can't tell if that's just my preference or the lasting shadow of that encounter. Either way, it was disgusting. I'm glad I never saw him again, and I assume he's no longer alive.